Hello friends and welcome. I'm Sara Lihz and today we're using one of my very favorite Christmas die sets. It's this snow globe from pixidustdesigns. And so I've cut a bunch of the pieces from a dark navy cardstock. I just love the size of this. It's beautiful and lovely. And then we're going to use the Let It Snow slimline die set that creates this sort of snowy village scene. And we're going to put that inside the snow globe. So I cut two of the long pieces that have the trees and the houses out of some white shimmer cardstock. And then one of the frames, but I'm not going to use it. And then just one little die from Camping Day. It's like these unicorn sparkles. I don't know what else to call them. We're going to use those two. I didn't have two shades of gray cardstock that were dark enough. So I used a paper pouncer and some dark gray ink just to darken up the cardstock and give me that two-tone look when I go to build my houses. And now I'm tracing around the snow globe. There's like a frame that goes around it. I'm layering up my slimline pieces with my hills and my trees. And I'm just trying to get a sense of like how much sky do I need to ink blend? Where is it going to start? And how high up are my hills and houses going to go? Once I get that all sort of figured out and just marked on my cardstock, I'm coming in with some Distress Oxide inks. I have Seedless Preserves down at the bottom. I love that little pop of like pinky purple just on the horizon line. Then Uncharted Mariner, maybe my favorite Distress Oxide ink. And then I will move after that into some Chipped Sapphire for that darkest blue up at the top and then a little bit around the edges just to create kind of a vignette. I'm using ink blenders. These are little blending buddies just to give me a softer blend. Normally I use like my domed foam, but I felt like this worked a little better in this case. I did reach for a domed foam eventually because I only have one blue blending brush and I wanted to be able to go back and forth between the Uncharted Mariner and the Chipped Sapphire. Once I get all of that blended, I'm bringing in some shimmering white, like pearly paint, and I'm going to flick that on just to create some stars in the background. If you wanted to, you could really step this up and you could poke little holes and use like an easy light to make this a sky with some twinkling stars, but we're going to keep it pretty simple. I'm holding up the die that cuts the frame for the snow globe, and then I'm just bringing in my hills and trees to figure out where I want to cut this. I want to make sure I don't lose those Seedless Preserves down at the bottom. Once I get that cut out, I can start building my scene. So I have these two layered pieces, and I'm just going to hold up that frame right around it. I'm using a white shimmer cardstock that's only 65 pounds. So I've backed it with the same piece, but out of some 120-pound cardstock just for stability. I know I want that as close to the bottom as I can. And I'm just going to kind of trace around the bottom of the frame. This I'm going to cut by hand, but you don't need to be super precise, right? I'm just trying to cut inside that pencil line so that I don't have a bunch of white cardstock kind of sticking out of the bottom. And then I will use the first frame and I'll line it up on that second slimline panel and kind of trace around that as well. I love reusing my dies in ways that maybe they weren't intended to get more use from them. And because this is a slim line, you actually can get several different scenes out of it, depending on where you decide to place the frame and then sort of trace and cut your scene. I'm also going to cut down this white piece. You wouldn't have to do this, but I didn't want a whole bunch of white cardstock that you could sort of see peeking out from behind my snow globe. So I just traced once again along the bottom of that frame. And then I trimmed it with my scissors. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. I just wanted something that was gonna hide under the frame. On my hilly scene, there are little pieces for the trees and for the houses that kind of stick up, and I wanted an evening scene. So I am coloring those in with my black marker, and because it's a shimmer cardstock, a little bit slick to begin with, it almost glows a little bit. But if you didn't want to do black, like you could certainly color that in with a yellow alcohol marker so it looks like all the lights are on the houses. You could make this a light up card where the lights in the houses turn on. But as much as I hate snow, I do love when it's snowing heavily and everything just seems to get a little bit quieter. and everybody in the house sleeps really hard. So that's what I was going for here. I didn't go quite low enough on the house. The door had some sort of white peeking up. So I just came back in with my alcohol marker and I filled that in. So I have, for my houses, they're cut out of the two different shades of gray. The house itself is the sort of lighter gray, and then the roofs are a darker gray. The trees are that same dark gray, and then I have a little deer that's in that dark gray. I didn't want to go black. I felt like black was too stark, right? Sometimes we see these winter scenes and it's just a silhouette along the skyline. But I wanted to give it at least a little bit of variation and depth in the scene. I also really appreciate that because the Let It Snow has the hills and trees kind of as part of the snowy hill, I don't have to figure out where everything's going to go. Some days I'm all in for arranging a bouquet or setting up a village scene, but some days I really love that my dies do it for me and they help me sort of figure out all the placement of the pieces. And so this is I think a really clever set. There are 2 different snowy hills to put in that scene, and they include 5 houses, I think 7 small trees, and then the frame itself has 2 large trees, like birch trees, I want to say. There's also 3 different deer of different sizes. There's one that's sort of sitting down, a buck, a doe. It's just beautiful. So I will link to all the products that I'm using below if you want to kind of check them out. If you're watching this as it releases, Pixi Dust is having a Black Friday, Cyber Monday sale, and all of these dies are on sale, which is really exciting. So here on the right, I have some 1mm black foam tape, and I'm just trying to figure out how many layers of cardstock I need on the bottom to make sure it's the same thickness. Each of my hills includes 1 layer of 65-pound cardstock and 1 layer of 120-pound cardstock. And so I just cut 1 extra layer from that slimline hill. I'm coloring it here out of 120-pound cardstock, and I'll glue 2 of them together. And then that bottom piece of the globe where my scene is will be the exact same thickness as the foam tape that I'm going to use to put the rest of the globe together. So I'm adding glue all over the back of the one that I have decorated, and I'm going to use my finger and just kind of smear it along the house, the tree, and the top of the hill. I'm putting shaker bits in here that are really, really thin, like wafer thin, and I don't want them to get stuck in there so that they don't move. Once I get those glued together, I'll just use my scissors and sort of trim around it. This is really easy because there is a little bit of thickness already in the original piece, so I'm just matching up to that. Then I'll put my 2 hills together. I want to make sure I have control over where things are going. So I'm putting glue only on the bottom of the piece that goes in front. And I will just kind of wiggle and layer those until I like the look of it. For the most part, I tried to get that all lined up when I was tracing along the bottom, but there is room for adjustment if you decide you want to move them a little bit. I'm going to add some acetate to the back of my frame. And so I just used the larger snow globe die to cut out a piece of acetate. This is graphics shrink film actually, and I like it because it's really thick and sturdy. And once I get that glued on there, I'll just trim along the bottom. I'm not doing a neat cut. It's really kind of messy back there, but no one's going to see it, so it does not matter. Then again, I keep checking. I'm layering. I'm making sure everything looks good. And now I can start sort of building up the layers that are going to give me room for my shaker bits. I'm adding glue to the bottom of that sort of acetate piece on the frame, and then I will layer that over my snowy hills. I was careful not to go up too high. I'm impatient. I don't want to have to wait for glue to dry or have my shaker bits get stuck in some glue. And then here I have 2 like 1/8 inch strips of thin black foam adhesive. I found that this was a perfect fit behind the frame of this globe. It's not a super dainty frame, which I appreciate because sometimes I feel like I'm fiddling having to cut down my foam tape over and over again. But then I only needed it where I don't have my scene, and they're all the same level because I checked it before I started assembling things. So these are some like shimmery white sparkle spots that are slightly translucent, and I was just testing the color. I sort of auditioned a handful of them, but I loved that these pick up a little bit of the color from that night sky because you can see through them just a little bit. I've added a touch of wet glue to the foam tape to give me some wiggle room, and then I'm adding glue only to the hill that's in the back. The one that's in the front isn't really going to adhere to our sky. So if I put glue there, I'm just going to end up with sequins stuck to it. Then again, I'm using my finger just to kind of smear that all the way to the edges, make sure I'm not creating catch points for my sequins. And I will hold the whole thing in my hand while I put it together. So I can just sort of pinch around the edges and know that I got everything lined up really nicely. I'll press that firmly, I'll give it a minute to dry, and now I have this beautiful winter scene. I have brought in one of my large snow globe die cuts, and I cut these little pieces, these decorative elements from 3 different colors of metallic cardstocks. I wasn't sure which one I wanted, but in the end I went with a gold foil, so it's got lots of shine. And then once I get that layered on there, I'm going to bring in my scissors one more time. I decided that I wanted this piece that's on the bottom to be at the same level as my frame and my acetate. So it doesn't need to be a tidy cut. I glued that on there to make sure I knew where it went, but then before it really dried, I can sort of wedge my scissors behind that and easily cut it, and no one can tell. It's a little bit of a mess back there. To another full snow globe die cut, I am going to add these elements. So I just use wet glue to kind of adhere my scene onto the top. I love that it gives me that wiggle room because I was very off when I set it down the first time. And then I have added that same thin black foam tape to the back of the bottom of the snow globe. I'll add a little bit of wet glue for wiggle time. I want to make sure it's butting right up against that frame, and I will add that on as well. So I got to this point and I felt like I was losing too much of that picked raspberry. I started to add my Merry Christmas here, and it all just felt a little muted, right? I didn't feel like I had that pop of color that I really wanted from the very beginning. So I'm going to add my Merry Christmas, and then we're going to start changing our mind about things. I've added little dots of glue all over the back, and then I'm going to tap that off on the back of my hand. That one, I just sort of tapped like I normally do, but because it's on acetate, all of that glue kind of smears out from under it if you're not careful. So I used my pokey tool to clean that up. And then for this one, I'm going to tap off a lot more glue. There's almost nothing on it. And then I can lay it down on top of the acetate. Nothing's oozing out. And it fits in there really well without anybody being able to tell I used wet glue. And so I'm looking at it here. I'm like, is that okay? Do I like it? You'll have to let me know, because I'm looking at it in editing and I kind of like how muted that is, but we're going to change it up. I do have these 3 unicorn sparkles, starry pieces from camping day, and I cut those from that same gold mirror cardstock, and I'm going to add those onto the acetate just to bring a little more shine to that night sky. And then while I ponder what to do about the color, we're going to put the actual card together. I want to make sure that I'm creating a fold at the top that is straight. So I've taken a little scrap of white cardstock and I'm taping the snow globe so that both of those bottom pieces that are on the left and right are right at the top of that. And then I can use the white cardstock to sort of line it up in my scoreboard. I gave this about a 1/2 inch, 5/8 of an inch, but enough that the glue is really going to adhere. I cut a white circle. I think it's a 4-inch circle of white cardstock. And then I just used my ruler and lined it up on that navy piece to make sure I knew where the fold was going to go. And I cut that off. I don't want to try to fold 2 pieces of heavyweight cardstock to get my card to open and close. So I'll fold back that top flap just to get it out of the way. And then I'll use wet glue to line up that white circle right up at that score line. And that way I have a place to write a message to my recipient and the card opens and closes nicely. Finally, I add glue to that flap and I line it up with the rest of the snow globe. And I have a wonderful shape card. I love shape cards, you guys. I just think that they're so much fun and they're surprising, and this is great to put on display. There's so many ways to put this together. Okay, so because I was still like hemming and hawing about the color, I got super brave. I cut that Merry Christmas from some cardstock that matches the seedless preserves pretty well. And I am adding dots of glue, and you saw how hard I pressed that onto the back of my hand. I removed as much of that glue as possible and to have it still be sticky. And I am lining that up very carefully to my snow globe. If I had messed that up, I don't think there would have been any saving it. That's like, now you got to start over. But it worked out pretty well, right? I just started on one end, like with the C of Christmas, and very slowly kind of lined up one letter at a time. The wet glue gave me a little bit of wiggle room. Yeah, that was a gamble, and I think it paid off. I added a little bit of shimmer pen all over my wording, and now I'm using the bow that comes in the snow globe set. This is a beautiful bow, a great size. I'm layering up some matte silver cardstock just with a darker gray to give it some stability. And then I have a dark gray that I'm using just as a drop shadow to create a little bit of dimension on the front. I like the sturdiness here because it is going over two different layers or thicknesses of cardstock because of the gold stripes that are on the bottom. And that will finish up our card. I love how freely this shakes. I love that it's sort of this calm, peaceful night scene, but I still got my little pop of color. I'll give you one good close-up look of this as well. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you do, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and I will see you next time.